Okay, you guys can see, right? Everything's good. Cool. Yeah, so I think we're about ready to get started. Right, yeah. So I have this little scratch pad open here because I like to type this stuff as I go, especially for this stuff, because when we get into the later stuff, it really is good just to see what sort of output you get. All right, so the topic of today essentially is object-oriented programming in JavaScript. So the first thing we're going to discuss is class-based object-oriented programming in JavaScript, which uses the class keyword similarly to how Python does things. We're going to kind of compare it back and forth with Python, because ultimately it's the same idea as Python's class idea. It uses slightly different syntax, but all of the concepts should be identical. After that, and I really do want to spend as much time here as we can in terms of making sure that's solid, because that's what you're going to continue to use and see. After that, we're going to talk about this idea of prototypes and prototypes versus classes. There's essentially two ways to do object-oriented programming. There's class-based and prototype-based. In the history of programming, I believe, besides for JavaScript, the only other people to do it that way is a language from like 50 years ago. So who knows why they made that choice. But anyways, JavaScript went the prototype way. And so we're going to learn a little about how that actually works. And then we're going to discuss the this keyword, which is, essential to how this keyword is like the self keyword in Python. It's essential to how class-based OOP works, but also to how prototype-based OOP works. And you'll see that it ends up being kind of tricky for a couple of reasons. And there's some ideas here we discuss in reference to it. In particular, someone mentioned this in the chat, but this keyword works a little differently whether you're within a function keyword or an arrow function. And so that's something just to note. And then finally, we discuss a little bit about how inheritance works in the prototype model. And just what that looks like, in a basic sense. And then even though it's not on here, my plan is that we spend about as much time as we can for this lecture, just sort of discussing things as sort of a general review of OOP and asking as much questions as you want about this area, because this area is going to be confusing. And I just want to give you guys the best shot at sort of asking the questions you have than trying to teach it to you top down when it's a difficult topic to do like that. But yeah, let's start with a class-based OOP. So as mentioned before, class is a later invention for JavaScript. It's pretty standard at this point, but because it wasn't there initially, it's not necessarily baked into the language. But yeah, let's compare it to Python. So here we have some Python. This should be recognizable to all of you at this point, where we have our class cat. We're declaring a new class called cat. We have this init function, which allows us to create a new instance of the cat and set a instance variable on it. And then we have this function eat, which references that the object itself through the self keyword, and then also takes its own argument. And then same with meow, we have to give it this self key argument, even though it doesn't actually use it, just prints meow. And then finally, we create a new cat in the form of Garfield. We give him the name Garfield. We see we're able to access his name. We're able to call meow. We're able to eat lasagna. Great. So now we're just going to see that same exact idea, but in JavaScript. So this is what it would look like in JavaScript. And let's just run it, because that's how you actually know something works. This is called scratch pad. Okay, so we're able to print Garfield over here. Garfield eats lasagna. Okay, that's funny that there's one little extra thing in there. Garfield eats lasagna, meow, meow. So right, how does this differ compared to this up here? Let's just look at it side by side. So class cat : okay, not too different. We have class cat, but JavaScript tends to not use that colon and then white space thing. Instead, we have braces to represent the body of the class. And then inside of it, you could see we have, instead of a init, we have a function called constructor. So when you're within the class world, you don't actually have to say like function constructor. You just say constructor and give it an argument and it knows what that is. So constructor is itself a keyword, just like underscore underscore init is, you know, this sort of like built-in idea. Constructor is a built-in idea. And I believe if a, well, no, so if a cat didn't have a constructor, that would be an issue, just like not having an init would be an issue. I believe kind of similar. I don't know what Python actually does here, but I believe if you were to make a simple class and not, basically you could take this out, I believe, and it would work up until the point it hits an instance variable and then says, what's that? Oh, actually, it completely works. It just gives you undefined for that instance variable. So that's good to know that, you know, the constructor is technically not necessary, but basically if you have any instance variables and what kind of class are you making that doesn't have any, you're going to want to have this constructor. And you'll notice that we don't have to pass in, we don't have to pass in self. That isn't a concept in JavaScript where you're passing in self. Instead, you have the this keyword that is accessible everywhere in the language. Unfortunately, as we'll see, everywhere, not just within classes, but within the context of a class, that this keyword will refer to the class as a whole. Yeah, and as you see, we have our, you know, so we could say this.name, and now our instance of a cat has a name on it, and then similarly eat food, right, etc. So right, this is it's more or less the same idea. As we'll learn later, that this keyword ends up being pretty tricky, and a modern JavaScript class ultimately is, you know, created out of based on all this other stuff we're going to talk about. So sometimes you will see some tricky behavior with the this keyword, even within a class, but it's only when you do something like you have a function within a function or something, or you're doing something else that's strange, where it can't just say, I mean, we'll get into it, but yeah, I guess the caveat is just to say, if you have to work much with the this keyword in JavaScript, which is rarely the case anymore, like in React, you just about never see it. But if you have to work with the this keyword in JavaScript, expect some odd behavior. And the response to that odd behavior will be learning more and more new things about the nuances of how that keyword actually works in the language, which is unfortunate. But yeah, how do we feel about this so far? As in, this is the JavaScript equivalent of the object-oriented class-based approach we saw in Python. Do we feel like we can write these, or does anything stand out as like interesting or strange?
So you need that new keyword to instantiate Garfield, right?
Yeah, good point. That's the one thing I didn't mention. So down here, I summarized some of the differences. We got class cat to, you know, class cat braces, init to constructor, self to this. We don't need to pass this as the first argument. And then finally, right, new. So Python doesn't do this. In Python, you just say cat like that, right? For no particularly great reason, really just because we'll get into the nuances of how the new keyword works in the old way before you had classes. But basically, yes, you have to put a new here. You'll see this in other languages too. Python is actually the odd one out that you don't do this. But you could see new as a way of saying, hey, this thing over here, when you run it, first create a new this keyword and then pass it implicitly to that that function we're about to call, which, you know, lines up with the constructor. And then when that function is done, return the this keyword. So if we didn't have this, there is no this keyword to bind to, as far as I know. Actually, I'm so curious what would happen if we ran this. It doesn't like it. Why not? Class constructor cat cannot be invoked without new. Okay, so at least it warns you about it. But right, exactly. So the new keyword I think Python made a smart choice in realizing, like, why are we adding a keyword there when, if it can throw this error, it obviously knows this is a class, it knows what to do. Why do we need this special keyword? But the new keyword is there to tell you you're creating something, you're creating something new in memory. It's a class, it's going to have this keyword, and basically it's implicitly doing this. Sort of implicitly, we're getting a this, and then we're using it, and then we're returning this when we're done. So that's sort of how to think about the new keyword in my mind. All right. So anything else about the this basic the like a class in JavaScript?
So since we're saving in this case, one, is it standard practice to save a new class object into a constant variable? And two, if it is, do we have to use getters? Does that mean we have to really implement getters and setters for every part so we can actually modify its attributes? Or are we going to still be able to do what we do in Python? We're just like, all right, this dot whatever, just go on, start changing stuff later on in code.
Great question. Yeah. So you're saying if I had something like const Garfield.name, well, basically my attitude is you use a const until you realize it's getting in your way, and then you use a let. So it's not like there's anything wrong with let. I just start with const as my default. But you're saying basically, okay, here I have my cat Garfield, and Garfield has a name on it, right? So I want to say that name is actually, I don't remember anything else from Garfield. Who's the guy on Garfield?
John's the guy.
Oh yeah, so this is like a cool episode where they switch bodies, like Freaky Friday. That'd be actually a great Garfield episode, if I do say so myself. So we're gonna change the name on Garfield and see what happens, right? And then we're gonna print it. Let me see what happens here. All right, that works. The reason why that works is because const only guarantees that you're not pointing Garfield at something new. So const will keep you from doing this, for example. If I try and run this, it's going to say, sorry, assignment to constant variable. So const, for better or worse in JavaScript, only keeps you from reassigning the variable. But if what the variable points to is a complex data type like an object, which can be modified, it won't complain if you do something like this. As in, we're still, Garfield still points to the same thing. We're just accessing its name property and then resetting it. So no, there's no need to use getters and setters for that sake. And my attitude is until I encounter a situation where const is throwing an error for me and not doing what I want it to do, I'm going to choose const.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Cool. You are right that I almost forgot we have getters and setters now in JavaScript, and that's an interesting thing to look into. So yeah, anything else about basic classes in JavaScript? All right, cool. Yeah, so I think then we are going to move on to talking about inheritance, Python versus JavaScript. So again, here I have a Python classes that we're going to do inheritance on. Like before, we had our animal. It's going to have an init function, eat, speak, and then we have our dog, which inherits from animal. We still have an init function because we have an additional thing to set up. So we call super on the original init, pass it its variables, and then we add our own instance variable, and then we have this new function called bark, and then we're overwriting speak in the original, and then you see we can make a dog. This is actually a bad example now because I have to, where is it? I didn't set this up so well. It needs to be something like Fido true. Otherwise, that's not going to work because we have that a dog expects not just a name, but an is service animal value, even though we don't. I guess the reason why it was working is because we don't use it anywhere. But we can still eat the chicken nugget, even though we didn't define that explicitly in dog. It's getting it from animal, and we can bark, which makes sense because that's on dog. But then we can also speak, and it's going to do the right thing because it's overwriting or overriding rather the functionality in animal. So let's just see that exact same idea in JavaScript. We'll just look at them side by side again. And let me just run it to make sure that it does what I think it does. So it doesn't do anything right now because I probably didn't give it any examples. Good point. So that is always good to know. Let's give it some examples, which, look a little different, but const Fido equals new dog, Fido true, and everything else should be the same, which is kind of cool that we just switched from one language to another and added like 2 keywords and we're done. Maybe not. Oh, true is not defined, right? Good point. It's true. So, but these are just syntactic differences, which it's good to recognize that like part of the benefit of learning 2 languages side by side, even though it can be annoying and confusing, is you recognize that there's these different levels where like there are some things that Python does actively differently than JavaScript and vice versa. But a lot of the times it's just syntax. It's just they decide to go with, this set of keywords and they decide to go and the other person decides to go with a slightly different set of keywords. You're capitalizing true or you're lowercasing it. It's not really different. It's just different because 2 different people designed it and there wasn't like standardization basically. But yeah, so this works. Let's look at it. Class animal like before. So we've already seen this. Now what about this? So instead of dog parentheses animal, JavaScript goes with what is a more standard way where like, Java does it this way. Most languages do it this way. You see this keyword extends. So class dog extends animal. We have a constructor like, which is the equivalent of our init. We don't pass self like before. And we're setting this on the is service animal. This is something to note difference. In Python, super is a function. And you call that function and it returns the inner instance of the animal that the dog has access to. And then you're calling its init function. In JavaScript, it's a little different. In JavaScript, super as a keyword is the object itself. So if I was down here, I could say, instead of just saying bark, bark, if I wanted to talk about its name, I could do, bark, bark says name, or sorry, this guy says bark, bark. And the way I would do that is I want to get access to this name. Well, I already have access to it because I called super, but if I wanted to just get it right from that object, I could just write super.name. Super, as you see, represents the animal. And it itself is an animal, whereas if I were to hover over this in Python, we'd see super is a function, and that function returns an animal, which is a little different. We'll just do super.name. I guess the better example would be in Speak. If I wanted to first say the actual thing that the animal says, I would say something like that, where I first speak and then I bark. And if we run that, we'd see I'm an animal followed by Fido, bark, bark. But right, yeah, so super represents the animal itself, but it can also be used like a function, which would be its constructor. So when you call it, like when you just do super dot, it's like you're referring to the animal itself. When you call it, you're referring to the animal's constructor. And so that takes the place of doing something like super, parentheses dot underscore underscore init, which I like this syntax a lot better than the Python one. This looks really clean to me. Yeah, how do we feel about this as JavaScript's way of doing things versus Python? Anything that's in Python, you're curious whether it is or isn't in JavaScript and how that's written?
Could you explain how Speak works? Because I see that it has two, it has super and this calling it. What would the output be?
Okay, so the way Speak works is first we have our animal, right? Animal has something called Speak. If I made an animal, if I said const, or we'll do it all down here, but I'm gonna, comment this out for a second and then just say const animal equals new animal, and that animal needs a name. So I'll give it the name, you know, Pikachu, even though I don't know that that is an animal. I don't know that you know, maybe not. It's an animal to me. So yes, we're giving you know, let's call it Pikachu. Really spending your value time well here. Right, so we're creating this new animal called Pikachu. Pikachu is going to have things on it already. So if I do dot, Pikachu is going to have a name. It's going to have something called eat and something called speak. If I call dot speak on Pikachu, what do you think is going to happen?
It's gonna speak from the animal class.
Yep, console.log, I'm an animal. Cool, let's do it. Pikachu, I'm an animal. Right. So now let's see how this is going to work in the dog case. So we're going to create our dog, Fido. Forget about eating for now. Forget about barking. And we're going to call speak on Fido. So Fido, first off, like, let's just say we don't even have anything in here, right? If Fido didn't have this, would this work?
I think so,
Yeah,
because it's
will work.
inheriting from the animal.
It's getting it from animal, exactly. And then the question is, if it did have it now, what do we think is going to happen? I could give it a body, something like, let's keep going back. We're going to give it the body, just this dot bark.
It's going to bark.
Exactly right. So when it's running speak, Fido, it knows Fido is a dog. So when it runs speak, it's going to say, hey, does dog have something called speak? And if the case was no, then it would say, okay, well, does animal have something called speak? But because dog has something called speak, we're going to run that. And the body of that is this dot bark. Well, dog has something called bark. So we run that and we can see it. We're going to say Fido, bark, bark. Now, this is where super comes in. Let's say I wanted to combine the two. Let's say I wanted it to not just do its own speak, but I actually cared that its speak included the functionality of animals speak. Well, I overrode it. So how am I going to get that? The way you get that is this, as in you use super to say, okay, I'm specifically talking about the animal within the dog now. Now I want to use its speak. I love that the IntelliSense can like tell us that. So right, we're calling animal.speak now as opposed to dog.bark. So animal, and if we hover over this, it's dog.speak, but super.speak is going to refer to the animal. So first it's going to run this line of code, and then only after that is it going to do whatever additional functionality we want dog speak to do. And then that's what happens when we actually run this. We'll see when we'll get rid of this for a second just so that it's less complicated or it's less confusing. But when we run this, we're first running super.speak, which runs I'm an animal, followed by this .bark, which is Fido bark bark.
Awesome, thank you.
Cool, yeah. And that's an important point that most of the value of inheritance is stuff like that, where you kind of not just overwrite things, but rather you sort of like get to piggyback on the thing you inherited from. And super is an important part of doing that. Otherwise, you would just be overwriting things and only getting you would only be inheriting the instance variables then. Whereas super provides a nice way of both inheriting the method and also overwriting it at the same time. So you get the benefits of both theoretically. So something worth noting is that as far as I know, you cannot do multiple inheritance in JavaScript. I am so curious if one tried to, like what it says, but I'm pretty sure it's just going to say, I don't even understand. No, the fact that it's not complaining about the syntax is very interesting to me. So it makes me wonder, can you do this? So I'm going to quickly type multiple inheritance class JavaScript because I didn't believe you could do it. Does not support multiple inheritance. I'm surprised it's even allowing that sort of syntax at all. Well, we're not going to worry. I mean, I'm like amazed. I wonder what's something I could put here to check if I created a new class Barker. How about that? We'll take this out for a second. So class Barker is its own class, and we're not even going to give it a constructor. Instead, this would be an example of like a mix-in where we're just giving it a function called bark, and it assumes the thing it has access to has something called name on it. So if I said, okay, it extends Barker as well, that means I should be able to call bark on it below, where I say, yeah, so Fido.speak should continue to work. And it doesn't, and let's see why not. Oh, it's confused about super. That makes a lot of sense, actually. So if I were to hover over super now, it thinks it's Barker. I wonder, could I say like animal.speak here, or it doesn't know about that? No, it doesn't. So I guess in this case, we'd have to say something like this dot internal. Yeah, I don't even know that there's a way, because super is no longer going to have meaning. I mean, it appears to choose the last one, so this probably will work. But still, I hate this. This dot bark is not a function. Yeah, well, there appears to be some basic support for multiple inheritance in JavaScript, but I have no idea how it works. And the important point is that multiple inheritance is, for the most part, a trap. You won't see it very often. And even though it's possible, it's full of these weird behaviors where super as a keyword no longer really makes much sense. And you're going to have issues, though it's good to know that it is apparently possible. Yeah. So any other questions about like how Python and JavaScript class-based stuff differs? Okay, sounds like we're pretty good on that. Yeah, it's worth reiterating that the difference is basically syntax. We kind of go through it here. But the core of the difference between Python and JavaScript when it comes to class-based objects is syntax. And I will tell you that in my own programming professionally, I have only used the class keyword approach when making objects, if ever making objects, for like 3 years now, I would say. That was the last time I even encountered the old approach. That said, we will teach you a little bit about the old approach because it does come up sometimes. There's almost too much to teach there, but I know that someone yesterday mentioned sort of when it comes to React, the modern approach to React, in which you do what they call like functional components versus object-based components. If you're doing object-based components in React, you actually will encounter some weird this keyword stuff, and you'll see some odd behavior that I don't know that we'll ever encounter it in this course, but you will see it sometimes, and it has to do with how the this keyword works, and maybe we'll get to some of that today in terms of seeing the odd behavior. But it's often the case that it's hard to sort of reproduce the odd behavior because it's so odd. But the point is, if you're working with it a lot, you'll see it eventually. And then you'll be like, why is it doing that? And the answer will be really obscure. But right, yeah, so the next step is basically to talk about prototypes. So classes are a later thing, and classes in JavaScript are ultimately built on top of this idea of prototypes, which is the original idea. So I have this long file here in which we discuss how the this keyword works in JavaScript, which you'll note is unlike self in Python. If you write the this keyword in JavaScript like this, just console.log this, that works. Like I'm going to do this. I got something. I got an empty object. Seems kind of useless, but in many languages, it would say, hey, you're not even in a class. What are you talking about using the this keyword? Like I'm just out of curiosity, if I were to create let me, I'm going to create a Python file right now. This is my Python file. If I were to say print self, okay, I can already see it doesn't like that. Why not? Self is not defined. It's never heard of self. Okay, so kind of done. I mean, I can run this, but I don't expect it's going to work. Right, because self is not defined. Cool. That is not the case in JavaScript. In JavaScript, this is defined everywhere, and we're going to learn why, because it's based on this prototype approach. So yeah, so first, what is this even referring to right now? Well, we see it's an empty object, but interestingly enough, if I were to open up Node and I were to type this, I actually get this gigantic object, right? There's all sorts of stuff in this object, and you'll notice it says object global. And then there's a bunch of other stuff here that, you know, we don't really understand, but it's basically telling us about the actual environment that we're in. We're going to exit out of Node for a second. And then similarly, I'm going to open up JavaScript just so that we can see the console in JavaScript. And in this console, I'm going to type this. And what do we get? Oh, we get this thing called window. Well, that's actually referring to this other keyword window. It's the same exact thing. But what is that? Well, window represents kind of everything the browser as a whole can do. It's a representation within the JavaScript environment of the browser itself. Or rather, yeah, of the browser window itself. So you see it's gigantic. But yeah, so that's an important point, which is that it's different in Node and in the Chrome browser. And it's because this keyword ultimately refers to the context in which code is run. So when you call it at the top level, when you call it, you know, outside of a function or anything else, this is going to refer to this top level context. So in the case of Node, it refers to this Node global object. In the case of JavaScript, or in the case of the browser, it refers to this window object. And that basically represents the entire environment that it's being run in. But Node is smart enough that if we run it like this, it understands that it's like basically, I think the reason it does this is because by default, it's doing this thing called use strict. Sorry, maybe is it use strict, or there's this thing that you can put at the top of a JavaScript file, whether it's the browser or Node, and it basically informs the environment you're about to run in that you care about certain things, like not giving it garbage values for things. So I believe if I go into Node here, I type use strict, it understands it. Does it understand it? I'm not sure. And then if I type this keyword, no, never mind. I'm not actually sure how to turn strict mode on within Node, but the reason why it's coming up as an empty object here is because it knows that you don't probably care that this keyword equals global at the top level. It's just, it knows it's meaningless for you, so it's just giving you an empty object. But yeah, let's grab all of this so we can walk through it. And like I said, this is very weird stuff. It's not going to make sense, and it's basically useless. But it's still how the language works, and so necessary to know on some level. So right, when we run this line of code, in fact, and we'll run these one at a time. I'll just sort of I'll comment everything out, and then just one line at a time, comment them back in. So we're going to run this. We get an empty object. Okay, and we know it's referring to global apparently in Node. So what's next? So here we have a variable called Alice, and it's holding an object, and that object has something in it called name, which points to a string Alice. And then we have this say hello function, which notably, because it's going to matter, we're using the full function approach. We're not using an arrow function. We're writing out the word function. you don't actually, as it turns out, you can make anonymous functions like this as well. You could have wrote that, but it's fine to just not give it a name if you're about to save it somewhere. And the say hello function within its body is using the this keyword. Even though it's not a class, we're using the this keyword. And then finally, we are going to call it like so, Alice.sayHello. And that actually works. So why does that work? It's a little confusing, but basically there's two ideas at play. One, JavaScript is what we call function scoped. So when you create a function, it rebinds the this keyword. So the this keyword up here refers to the global object, right? When you have a function with the function keyword, it rebinds the this keyword. So now the this keyword refers to something, instead of referring to the global this keyword, it's referring to something relative to say hello. And then the next thing is that we're going to call Alice.sayHello. Because it's within the Alice object, if I say Alice.sayHello, then when sayHello runs, it's going to run this line of code. It's going to see the this keyword and it's going to say, okay, well, what is the this keyword for me? What's my context? My context is actually Alice. And then it looks within Alice and sees this thing called name. So that is something called dynamic scoping. It's actually fairly confusing because it would seem, based on how we define this, that the this keyword should always refer to the object it's within, perhaps. But as it turns out, that is not the case, because I could do something weird like this, where let's say I take this function called sayHello, and I'm going to put it outside. I'm going to make it a function like this, and we're going to call that function sayHello. And I'm going to put that sayHello function in here. And just so you know, in JavaScript, you can shorthand for a key value pair where the key is a name and the value is a variable. It's just that. But to be explicit, let's just write it like that. So we'll see that Alice has its own sayHello, which refers to this sayHello. And then their sayHello is also a freestanding thing. So when we call Alice.sayHello, we're going to see that same behavior because Alice is its context. But if I were to say something like just say hello, we'll see that we say hello, my name is undefined, because say hello, it is a function, it is binding the this keyword, but then the this keyword is going to refer to its context. Its context in this case is nothing, as in it's not dotting from anything. And so it's as if we took that global keyword and dotted from there, and then it runs the say hello function, but it looks in that global object for something called name, and it doesn't find it because that's empty. So then finally we get a regular old say hello, or sorry, we get, say hello with undefined as the name. But then alternatively, I could do something like const. So yeah, that up there is not going to work. But I could have Bob here and make Bob the name. And you'll see that we're still referring to that same say hello function. But when we call Alice.sayHello, it does one thing. And when we call Bob.sayHello, it's going to do another thing. And that's because Bob is now the context of this sayHello, even though it's referring to the same function. So you can kind of see at this point how we're starting to get something that resembles class-based stuff, where, it's almost like we have classes, but not quite. And that's sort of the point of this, that you can mimic classes in a way, or it's just basically an alternative approach to doing object-oriented stuff. But in my opinion, it's pretty weird and confusing. And I'm sure you guys agree because it's new to you anyways. All right, so before opening it for questions, we just want to point out this arrow function thing. So let me uncreate Bob for a second. We'll comment this out so that we don't print anything right now. Let's just make sure we're not printing anything. So here we have a Bob object. And again, we're having a name called Bob and then say hello. But notice we're not using the standard function syntax. We're using an arrow function. And in fact, we can make this a little shorter just because it's an arrow function. We don't have to even write it like that. We can write it like this. What happens when we run bob.sayHello now? My name is undefined. Why is that? Well, based on what we said before, it seems like, well, sayHello is a function, and that means that it's going to rebind to this variable. So then when we call bob.sayHello, Bob should be the context. But the thing is, one difference between arrow and regular functions, and this was done on purpose because sometimes you need this behavior. Arrow functions do not rebind to this variable. So when sayHello is called here, this variable here is not a new context who's then going to look at its parent Bob. Instead, it shares the exact same context as Bob does, and Bob is defined at the top level. So Bob's context is global. So it's this right here is going to be referring to global. As you can see, if we hover over it, this type of global this, so it doesn't know that. I love that these hovers are telling me things, because right here, if I hover over it, well, it's saying any, which is a little less useful, but basically it's no longer telling me, well, that's the global this, which is cool. But right, so this doesn't work. You might be saying, why is this even functionality? It's really because if you're nesting things, you might be in a situation where you want to say, well, I don't want a new context. I want, like, basically the problem with this approach is that if Bob is an object and there's things nested and nested and nested, like functions within functions within functions, I might be in a situation where I want all of this keywords to refer to Bob. But because I'm nesting things, we would get into a situation where I would have something like a function here, and it's probably not going to understand. Right. Okay. So like if sayHello was a function, and maybe within sayHello, we have our own function called like actually sayHello. And a function called actually sayHello. And that is what calls this. And then at that point, we actually call it actually sayHello. So based on how we wrote this, we have Bob. And then we have sayHello, which is a function. So this keyword within sayHello should refer to Bob. So this .name should refer to Bob. And if over here I were to write console.log this .name, it's going to know this .name when we call it is Bob. So I actually wonder right now, like, I often don't know if this stuff is going to work once I get into this stuff. Right, when we're calling bob.sayHello, we're actually able to say Bob here. But then after that, we're calling actually sayHello. Function actually sayHello. Function actually sayHello is actually a new context, or it's rebinding to this variable. So its context is not Bob, but rather sayHello. So when it runs console.log, my name is this .name, it's going to look for something called name off of whatever is in sayHello, which doesn't have a name. So as ugly and weird as this is, I solve that by saying something like this, where I say, well, actually sayHello is a arrow function. So its this .name will refer to whatever its parents this .name is, and its parents this .name is Bob, which has a name called Bob. And when we run this, that works. Like I said, extremely confusing and weird, and why. I also dislike this, but it's worth knowing about. So for now, let's stop for a second and basically up until what we've discussed, how do we, like, any questions?
That just seems like such a convoluted implementation of an object function.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So in my opinion, like the thing when you're using Python is an example of someone who really understood programming language design and had a plan and a goal and did a really good job. And even then, after he made Python and they got to version 2, he was like, there's some things I want to change that I just can't change at this point. Okay, breaking change, Python 3, we're going to reinvent the language. JavaScript, on the other hand, is a language made by someone who, even if they knew what they were doing, they basically didn't know what they were making it for exactly. They had 10 days to make it. They were an individual person. After they were done with those 10 days, they begged their boss to let them have more time because they didn't think it was a great creation. And then it was never able to remove features. It was only able to add them. So that's what this is, as in it's convoluted, it's weird, it's a terrible approach. It's based on something that I find it so funny that a lot of the weird ideas in JavaScript come from this language called Lisp, which is one of the first languages of all time. It's from the 1950s. And the funny thing is, all these ugly, weird features are from Lisp version 1. Lisp version 2 got rid of all these features because they were like, that was a mistake. And this guy, 50 years later, is like, oh, I love version 1. Let's do it the way version 1 did things. So yeah, it's incredibly ugly and weird. And that's why people who worked in JavaScript were begging for something like the class keyword because it made it make sense. It made it like other languages. If you learn other languages, you'll see that class-based approach over and over and over again. You will never see this approach again. It's so weird. But at the same time, it's kind of like you get into these weird situations every now and then where you have to know it. An interesting point here, if we're going to go back to the original thing. So like this, I run say hello. It's going to say my name is undefined. There is a way to fix this, and it's a built-in value that I think I can run it before or after. But if I say no. So I have Bob, right? Bob is an object. If I do dot, oh no, it's not. I think it's maybe object.bind. Right. So this is an important thing. JavaScript has some of these helper things, and they're necessary at times. So if you hover over bind, it says for a given function, creates a bound function that is the whatever. But basically the first function, or the first thing you pass it, is what you want this value to be. And then what is the rest of it? Never mind. No, the first thing you give it is the function or the object, I guess, that you want to, oh no, the function that you want to rebind the variable for. And then finally, I get very confused. Okay, so basically, oh right, here's what we want to do. So Bob.sayHello doesn't work, right? But remember, Bob.sayHello is a function. And functions have this thing called bind in them. And because of that, we can explicitly pass into this argument. So we can say something like Bob, and then that's going to return me a new version of sayHello that does have this value bound. And then I can call that. I believe that this works. No, still not working. I think maybe I have to Bob.sayHello. Oh, right, because it's a arrow function, it's just never going to work. It doesn't like it doesn't respect this idea of binding. But I guess the point
that,
yep.
Yeah, the arrow function bind thing, that's a good one.
Yeah, well, I guess what I could do is this, as in if I grab sayHello from Bob and then I explicitly rebind this variable to be Alice, and then I run it, I believe at this point it's going to print my name is Alice, right? So this is an incredibly ugly, weird line of code. You do see stuff like this sometimes when working in the object approach to React, just because it has to overcome some of these weird JavaScript things. That's the only reason I ever even learned this, and that's also not how React is done anymore, and it hasn't been for a few years. So, I mean, as you can probably tell when you dot on this sayHello, it's sort of like endless how you got bind, call, like there's a lot of apply. There's lots of ways that you can do weird things in JavaScript that are unfortunately necessary given this original approach to objects. Yeah, Adam, did you have anything to say or?
No, that was it. I was gonna say at some point we can do a break too, if we want to.
Yeah, we're gonna do a break at 10, so in 7 minutes.
Got it. Yeah, this is awesome. And just to reiterate what you're saying, JavaScript is a weird language. There's a good talk and a good book, JavaScript, the good parts. And you covered a lot of it, Benjamin. And JavaScript isn't going anywhere. So although it is weird, there is a huge amount of value in understanding these deeper parts of how the language functions.
Yeah, and I would say that like we've said, you know, the nature of JavaScript is it can't remove features, but the truth is JavaScript is a great language at this point. It's a great language if you avoid the weird old features and you don't have to touch them almost ever anymore. So yeah, I mean, it's a real question of like, maybe this is still worth knowing about, but in 10 years, will it still be worth knowing about? Like, it's hard to say because there's definitely aspects of JavaScript we will never teach you that you will never encounter in your career, and yet they are in there just because they were put in there in 1993 and abandoned in 1995 and then never heard from again. But yeah, before we take a break, any more questions about this essential idea of how we work with, we haven't even gotten to objects really, but how we work with this keyword in JavaScript.
I have a question.
Yes.
See, for the Bob is an object and has a function inside. Do you mind to show me how to write the same thing with Python?
Okay. So you're saying if I were to say code scratchpad.py, rather I'll do it like that. So you're saying how to write a object with a function inside of it in Python?
Yes.
Okay, well, first, let's just copy it line by line. So we're trying to make a variable called Bob. So instead I would just, in Python, just write Bob. And then we don't call them objects, but we call them dictionaries in Python, but it's basically the same idea. So we're gonna have this dictionary, and then our dictionary keys in Python, we can't just say something like name, I believe. We have to actually wrap it in quotations. So we'll do that, and we'll say Bob, and then I give it the next thing, and the next thing I'm giving it is say hello. And then this is where things get different. If I want to have a function within an object here, I can do that in JavaScript, or sorry, I can do that in Python, but that's where we use what's called the lambda keyword, which I believe other people in the class can maybe confirm for me, but have we talked about lambda yet in Python? We have, okay, good. So lambda is how you create the equivalent of an arrow function in JavaScript. It's just a way of creating a function in line without naming it. So instead of saying like def, say, you know, what you're used to maybe is we're going to say def, say hello, and it takes no arguments. And then we would say print, maybe we'll give it an argument of name. And then we say print, my name is name. So if we wanted to do this in Python, we do it a little differently. Well, first, actually, I believe this will work. So I think right there is enough that I can say Bob like that, and I can say Bob dot, or I have to rather get it like this. And then once I grab it, I have to give it that argument, which happens to be Bob name. And I believe this should work if I do Python. Yeah, so that does work. That is one way to do it. And then the other way would be a lambda function in which we say lambda, which means, you know, a function that we're just not naming that we can write right here. And then someone remind me about lambda syntax. Can I just write it like that? Like I can just write name, right?
Yeah.
And then within the body, I would just put something like that. And then I would have the exact same thing. So I can remove that. And this is this works as well. So that's how we would do the same thing in Python, but notably, we can't do a this.name type thing in Python. It doesn't have that concept for objects. So we would have to explicitly pass it the argument we wanted, or make a class.
Thank you.
All right, good. Yeah. And just if we want to see that, if we did want to make a class, that would be more like class, we would have something like class person. Person would have an init. That init would say self. We give it self.name equals name, and we'd initially give it a name. And then within here, we might have a def say hello, which again takes the self, but nothing else. And then within there, we would print this. And now we could get something similar to that, this variable where we can say self.name. And now if I said something like Bob equals person Bob dot say hello, now we have something closer to this JavaScript approach. And really classes are the way to do that, sort of like reference something with this variable in Python. It's really JavaScript that's weird, that allows you to use this variable outside of something like a class, and then you have to know about all this weird behavior. But yeah, we're gonna break for 10 minutes now. How about that? 10 minutes sound good? All right, see you all at 9:10. And I'll stop recording and then re-record, yeah. Oh, you can pause recording? I'm gonna do that. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. You guys can see it, I'm assuming. Yeah, I'm actually getting a little, there we go, Zoom broke. Zoom breaks. Can you guys see or hear me right now? Give me a thumbs up if you can see or hear me. Cool, it's funny because Zoom says it broke on my end and it's about to kick me out, just wait. And back. Okay, and we're recording again. Yeah, I don't know why. It's funny because somewhere in that code, Zoom is running. There's some issue where the first time I share my screen in a while, it doesn't like it. And then every time after that, it's okay. Cool. So we're recording. I'm on the screen. You could see me. So where were we? Right. We got these scratch pads, which I'll close the Python one for now. And we just went over basically how this keyword works in ordinary functions in JavaScript and how it cares about this idea of context, which is not where it's written, but rather where it's run, which I hate. But that is the reality of how it ultimately works. So let's continue from here. But first, I guess, any questions? Do we have questions about this current approach to using this keyword in ordinary functions in JavaScript? Right, fair enough. Yeah, let's move on. So the new keyword, you've already seen the new keyword when you were making classes. So when you made, if you had some, class dog, whatever it was, without even saying what a dog is, if I wanted to make an individual dog, I would say const dog equals new dog. And if I didn't write that, it would complain that you need this new keyword, otherwise it doesn't understand. So the new keyword, like this keyword, it existed before classes and it still worked before classes, but in a slightly odd way. So how did it work? Well, first we would have, let's say we're creating a person class. Well, we didn't have classes back then, so instead we had functions. And we might say something like, I have a function called person, and That function takes a name. And like a normal function, I mean, if this was a normal function, we could like print out name, right? But in this case, we're going to say this dot name equals name. And then the question is, what happens if I just run this function? If I were to say const Alice equals person Alice, and then right after that, I'm going to print out what Alice looks like, what actually happens? You get back undefined. So why is that? Well, I'm running this function called person. It takes a name. Then internally, it has this thing called this, which, as we've mentioned, it's going to, this is going to be related to its calling context when it is called. But we are calling it right here because we're not calling it on anything because it's just being called with reference to the global variable. So it's going to put something on the global variable, I guess, called this.name. That's a really good question. If I were to say console.log global after this, I wonder what I get. Yeah, global has something called Alice on it. That's very funny, in my opinion. That's probably not what we wanted. Instead, we wanted Alice to get back an object that had something called name on it. So the way you accomplish that is with the new keyword. The new keyword can take any function and it basically says, okay, this function first creates a new this keyword, then it does stuff to it, and then it returns it. So it's as if we had something like this internally. You know, we're not actually going to write that, but stop it. So it's as if this was in there. And now when we run this, we actually get back, you know, something that is recognized as being of type person, and it is an object, and that object has something on it called name, which was set correctly in the constructor. So as you could see, a lot of these ideas that ended up in the class-based approach, they exist on some level in the old way that JavaScript does things. They're just a little more awkward and more prone to doing something incorrectly. Because if you left off that new, it doesn't break, it works, but it works in a very weird way. Whereas you notice that when we had a class called person, if you leave out the new, it actually says, hey, that makes no sense. You know, and it's something to get used to, that oftentimes when you see an error, you think, oh, that's bad, I don't like seeing errors. But actually, it's so much better to see an error than for something to fail silently. So I'd rather see an error when I do something like call, you know, a class constructor without the new keyword than to just it silently say like, okay, cool, I can do that. And I assumed you wanted me to add this thing called name to the global variable. And that's what you wanted, right? And then you're going to save undefined to Alice. That's what you wanted. To me, that's way worse. But yeah, that's how the new keyword works in the original approach. You can probably start to see how with this approach, one is able to build the class-based approach. It's just not sort of pre-built for you. That's how people used to have to do things. Okay, so now we're going to get to this concept of prototypes. So a prototype, much like a class, is a way of sharing code, essentially. So if I were to have this approach I had here, and maybe I have something in there where it's not just this dot name, but I have something like this dot say name. And that is going to be equal to a function. And here's where it gets confusing, where I have to say like, well, what is going to be the context of this dot name, right? So I think I want a real function here. And within that function, I'm going to say console.log. Hello, my name is, and then we'll put the name in there, which we reference with this dot name. Based on how we do this, we could have just said name, but we're going to reference this dot name. And now if I say something like, you know, I have an Alice who is a person, Alice should have something on her called say name. If I run that based on how I wrote it, it does indeed work, right? The problem with this approach is that, let's say I had Bob. We're gonna have Bob, we're gonna name him Bob, we're gonna do the same exact thing. This will work. So, hello, my name is Alice, hello, my name is Bob. The problem with it is that they both have a completely unique function called say name. And that means that if you had 1,000 objects, well, it makes sense that these 1,000 objects should all have a unique copy of their name variable. But methods are the kind of thing that, why should you have 1,000 copies in memory of a method? They're all identical. They're only different based on, in this case, the context in which they're run to understand the this.name. But it's silly that each one would have its own thing. So this is the original reason behind prototypes, and prototypes start to get at this idea of inheritance, where you can build to it a little by little. So basically, instead of doing it like this, we're going to say, okay, well, we have a person, which, you know, is just a function. And even though a function is a function, it's also an object. That's a weird aspect of JavaScript that there's no reason I can't add things to this. So we have this person. And I'm actually going to say, okay, on the person itself, which is a function, I'm going to add this variable called say name, and I'm going to make it equal to this function body right here. And if I did that, I don't think that quite works yet. We're going to try that. Does not work. It doesn't like it. Why not? Because it's saying Alice.sayName is not a function. So instead, I might have to write something like person.sayName.bind. In this case, Alice. And I wonder, does that work now? That works, yeah. But that's pretty ugly. So the better way to do it is, instead of that, if you want something that resembles the way a class has methods, you use this prototype idea. So we say, instead of person.sayName, we say person.prototype.sayName. And the idea is that this function called person is going to have on it something called a prototype, which is a special keyword, or at least a special property that is going to be on every object. And the prototype is sort of like, just like you can inherit from another class, if you create a new person object, it will inherit this prototype. And whatever's on the prototype, it's going to have access to, not as a unique copy, but all objects that inherit from person will share the same prototype object, which is why it's called a prototype. It's actually one thing they all share. And so now I'm going to say Alice is a person and Bob is a person, and both of them should now have on them this function called sayName, and this should work. Cool. And I actually wonder if I wanted to say, I think there's something like object.getPrototype or something. Get prototype of Alice. And I can actually print this out, where I can say, what is Alice's prototype? And we see Alice's prototype is a function that has, or is an object that has the function sayName on it. And just like with instance variables, I can say, okay, well, actually part of the prototype for a person is that, I guess this is more like a class variable, because we're saying everyone who is created as a new person is going to share this same prototype. So I could say something like, what's something that all people have in common? We'll say default legs, default num legs, because not everyone has that many legs, but the default is 2. So that's part of the prototype. And then if I, again, print this, we're going to see that, okay, default num legs is 2. And just to show this, I'm going to say, just to show that it is the same, I'm going to say object.getPrototype of Alice, and I'll say Alice proto. And I'll do the same thing for Bob. And I just want to show you that if I try to compare them, they should be the same thing, as in they're not just copies of each other. Like if I printed them both out, we would see that they contain the same thing for sure. But if I were to say, does Alice's prototype, is Alice's prototype the exact same object? And I wonder, is there like an ID, or I'm almost positive if I compare them, it's going to say, yes, they are the same. Let's try that. Yep, they're the same. And then importantly, if I were to say something like, because they are the same, if I were to say, okay, well, I want, yeah, it's a good point. I don't, part of the prototype thing, you'll see I did this object.get prototype above. I actually can't at any point say alice.prototype. Like if I tried to say alice.prototype dot default numlegs equals 42, and then I got Alice's prototype, I don't think that actually works. We're gonna try that. Sorry, rather I'm just gonna print it again. Let's see what happens here. But as you can see, I'm basically experimenting. I don't generally know what's going to happen with this stuff because it's odd. So it's going to say cannot set properties of undefined. That's right, because prototype is something that you can access it on the class. Essentially, you can access it on the person function, which is our constructor or our constructor-like thing. But once we create an Alice, we can't just directly access Alice's prototype. So I guess that's the protection there for the fact that they all share the same thing, but it's not like one of them can just change it up and that will automatically affect the other. The reason why they can all share the same thing is because the thing they all share is sort of frozen at that point. I don't think there is a way to update it. And I believe if I did something like, if after I created these two objects, I then were to say, oh, well, actually it's 42. I don't think that actually changes anything, but let's see. No, it does change things. Okay, so that's another good example of why it's a terrible design, because even though Alice and Bob are referencing this thing that they inherited from, someone at a later point can just outright change it. And that it's going to reflect that because they don't have a unique copy of it. They're all pointing to this same prototype object. But everything I'm showing you here is basically just more reasons why people hated this concept or this set of concepts and why it was eventually not abandoned because you really couldn't, but just sort of like pushed into a corner or stored in the attic, and the new toy was brought out and we mostly use the new toy because everyone hates this stuff. But still, we're gonna, I mean, I guess that is sort of everything. Prototypes are the way you used to do something class-like. They're the way you do inheritance. It's worth pointing out that much like inheritance, the way it works is that if someone, basically, we have this thing called Alice. We're going to call say name on Alice. First, it's going to look in the Alice object, in the this key, in the the this for Alice, for something called say name. And as we showed before, if I were to console.log Alice, I would see that Alice just has something on it called name. So the idea is there is nothing called say name on Alice. It's only that once it exhausts looking for say name on Alice, that it looks on Alice's prototype and it finds it there. But that keeps happening. So if, let's say, person inherited from something called being, we would have something like being, which let's just say it doesn't even take a name, but every being has on it something called is alive, which is equal to true. And so we have this person with a name, and basically I think so we can say something like how would I there's certainly a way where I can say something like I think I would say something like object.create. I mean, there's a way to say that maybe I can just say the prototype is a new being. And in this case, we have a person that we are creating who has a yeah, I mean, I don't even know what this is going to look like. But I'm going to try and say console.log. And we actually want to get whether Alice is alive, and it seemed to recognize that that's a thing. So no, we're getting undefined. Let's see, when we create Alice, we create a new person. That person has a name and a prototype, but it probably just doesn't want me doing it this way. It seems to work better with functions. Person dot prototype. Yeah, as you can see, there's basically a way you can mimic inheritance, but it's weird. I think the main way I know is that we have something called object.create. And if we look at so an object.create, object to use as a prototype may be null. So we would say something like creates an object that has the specified prototype or has a null prototype. It's almost like we would say, how do we want to create if a person inherits from being, then we would say something like maybe something like object.create. It wants as prototype a new being. I wonder if this will work even. No, it hates it. Probably doesn't like me reassigning this variable. Yeah, basically, no one does this anymore. It's very ugly and weird, but there are ways of mimicking inheritance-like things. You could see it with the methods that we can sort of inherit them. But the point I just wanted to make is that there's this sort of prototype chain. But yeah, that said, this is ugly and weird stuff, and we can keep talking about it, and it certainly comes up at times. But at this point, we have an hour and a half left. We can give you breaks and stuff, but I just wanted to leave time to talk about it because you almost certainly have questions. I barely understand this stuff. I find it very ugly and confusing. And even when I was learning, this was already mostly out of date. It does come up every now and then. But yeah, you're not really going to see, you're going to use JavaScript classes in the assignments, but I don't really recommend trying to use the other way. We just wanted to let you know about it. But yeah, we have a fair amount of time to ask questions. And if nobody has questions, I can just demonstrate more odd behavior. All right.
So there's no like a prototype concept in Python. That's just a JavaScript.
Yes. Yeah. So basically, you can think of, there's two general approaches to doing object-oriented programming. So the main term would be object-oriented programming. And then there's really two different competing approaches. One is the class-based approach. The other is the prototype-based approach. At this point in history, the class-based approach has won. So when people say object-oriented programming, they mean class-based object-oriented programming. It's just sort of a fluke of history that the prototype model exists. I find it incredibly strange. I don't believe there's another language that is around right now that does the prototype way of doing it, but it's basically a different approach that at least was done at times. So I'm learning about, right, there's there was a language like object-oriented programming didn't even exist until sort of the late 80s, where it started becoming an idea in academia. And then by the 90s, it started getting implemented in real languages. I think the prototype approach comes from this language called Self. And that was the language to come up with that idea. And for whatever reason, it was implemented as the way of doing it in JavaScript, but it's weird. Some people claim there's some pros to doing it this way. But I mean, I think the best resource on this would be MDN objects. So MDN is generally going to be your go-to way of learning how something works in JavaScript, because they sort of are the authority on like the specification. But as you can see, they start with just this basic, you're building an empty object, and they're sort of like building it up from there, where you have this keyword. And this would be a reasonably good resource, or a good resource. Let's keep going through it. But as you see, it takes a while before they even get to this keyword. Then finally, we have this idea of constructors, not class-based constructors, but this function that you're gonna, call with new, and the new keyword. And then we keep going, and you see there's actually only after that do they talk about prototypes, and only after that do they talk about the general concept of OOP, and then only after that do they talk about classes, which is now the modern approach. But some of this might be helpful, this prototype chain stuff, because I wasn't able to really demonstrate that, and that's the real reason why prototypes are a thing, because they sort of replace class-based inheritance hierarchies. So what might be an example? I mean, feel free to read through this MDN doc. But yeah, I mean, this is a bit of a rough lecture just because we feel it's necessary to tell you about this stuff. But it's really just a property of JavaScript having this long tail of a history. And it's uncommon for the average, even senior staff level developer who works every day in JavaScript to have a deep understanding of this, because it's been replaced, more or less. Something that maybe is worth talking about now, I think this actually would be a good use for our time. JavaScript is a language that has been updating things as it goes, and part of that is that this class-based approach is more powerful than it was originally. So we've already demonstrated that with the classes. You have everything you have in Python. You have inheritance. You have instance variables. We didn't show it, but you do have class variables. So if I had, animal, or just to demonstrate, if I had an animal and I would say that, every animal has a genus, the way you do that is you just write it up here. So I would say genus equals animal. It seemingly doesn't like this. Why doesn't it like it? Okay, I think it just wants me to write it like that. But the idea is that I can have my constructor, and maybe I take a name and I can say this dot name. And then I can create a new animal like const animal equals new animal Pikachu. And then I could print out console.log animal.name. But notably also I could print out console.log. Well, if I try animal.genus, okay, it does work. But just as well, we could say something like, I believe we could say animal.genus, and the idea is it's shared by all of them. And it's saying undefined for both of them. Why is that? I created a new animal. Yeah, why are they both undefined? Can anyone? Oh, right, because I didn't set it. But this next one, animal.genus, is undefined. I wonder why. I guess you can't do that. I guess you have to do it like this. And then, okay. But this would be, as far as I know, a class variable. Otherwise, it would be on the this keyword. So if I were to create a second animal, let's call it Pikachu, and then Squirtle. Proper. I can print Pikachu's name. I could print Squirtle's name. And then the question is, if I print, I'm going to print Pikachu's genus. And then I'm going to say Pikachu.genus equals Pokemon. And now if I try and print Squirtle's genus, what happens? Let's see. Okay, I guess you can't reset that variable. Or it only got reset for Pikachu. That's probably the more common case. So I guess that isn't a class variable. Yeah, I mean, the details on this are always unique. I know there must be a way to do a class-based variable in JavaScript. Otherwise, this genus up here is no different than saying this dot name or this dot genus rather. But let's see, like we have, right, this is the new feature I wanted to show you. So the idea of a private variable or private instance variable. So there's this idea called encapsulation in object-oriented programming in general. What it means is that your object is sort of like a container, and it's going to contain variables and logic, but maybe you don't want to share all of that. Maybe you only want to share some of that, but some of that is just internal. So maybe this genus thing was something that, I'm going to have my constructor, and then I'm going to say, have a function called announce myself. Now let's call it description. And in this description, we're going to console.log some stuff. And what are we going to console.log? We're going to console.log our name, but just as well our genus. So my name is this dot name, and I am a genus. And it wants it with the this. Honestly, I think that's no, it doesn't want that. Okay. Does it have to be that? I wonder. So I'm going to create a Pikachu, and then I am going to call Pikachu.description. And first, let's just see if this works or if I got to change something a little bit. Genus is not defined, right? So it does want me to say this dot. And let's try that again. Great, so it works. But as you see here, we have this hash. So this is a pretty new feature in JavaScript, I believe, in that the hash implies it is a private thing. So I can say something like, well, first let me just show that I can say Pikachu.description, but just as well, I can print out these things in Pikachu, like Pikachu.name is going to be there, but I could also say Pikachu.genus. And if I write this, great, it works. But I have this hash, right? So let's say I say, well, the genus is actually unique, like an internal thing. I don't want anyone outside to know about it. So I can do hash genus. And then down here, when I reference it, I say this dot hash genus. And you might think, well, I can put it out here too, right? But no, it's already yelling at us. And it's giving us the right thing. It's saying property genus is not accessible outside of class animal because it has a private identifier. So that's the main point, that you can have with this hash, we can now have private variables where I'm able to print this out. So within the class, it knows about genus, but outside of the class, I have no access to it. And that's a pretty powerful feature that JavaScript now has, that languages like Java tend to have, but Python does not have it. And the problem with not having it is that everything you put on the class, even if it's just like a helper method, even if it's just a variable that's there to help you sort of keep track of things internally, you can't help but share it with everyone. And that ends up creating a certain amount of ugliness when you're like creating an API and you're sharing something, because basically you can't easily distinguish between what people should and shouldn't pay attention to. And before we had this, the approach was basically you'd have something that looked like, so as it turns out in JavaScript, it's perfectly fine to start a variable with a $sign. So in Angular JS, in the original Angular, they would have things like this, where they would say $, genus, put a $sign there. We'll say it's a Pokemon, and then we print the description, and this will still work. But importantly, if I say, okay, Pikachu dot, I can not only get the name, but I can also grab the genus and just print it out. And importantly, I could also change it, where I could say Pikachu dot genius equals heck 45, because JavaScript doesn't care about types. So great, my name is Pikachu and I am a Pokemon. And then afterwards I change it to 45. So if I were to do this first and then the description, it should say that Pikachu is a 45 and I am a 45, okay? And the point of all this is that the $sign has no real meaning. It was there just as a choice Angular made to say, hey, if a property within our object starts with a $sign, please don't touch it, because we use that internally, and if you change it out, it could break something. But we can't help but share it because JavaScript has no means of hiding things. And that's a really weak form of guarantee, because you're basically saying to the people who use your thing, you can break it. We're just trying to give you pointers about how not to break it. And of course, if you say that someone can do something, someone will find a reason why they think it's a good idea to do something. So they try it, and then it only breaks something weirdly down the line. So yeah, this hash approach actually buys you something. So I'm just gonna find these. With this hash approach, we actually have something good now, where this, I imagine, will not work now, and it'll say private field genus must be declared in an enclosing case. Okay, that's an odd error, but basically they're not letting me reset. No, I guess it's complaining about this, that for whatever reason, private things don't go on this, they go up here, and then it's going to give me the right complaint, which is you shouldn't be accessing that outside of the class. So yeah, that's a modern feature. As you see, we also have private methods. So it's the same exact idea, but let's say I have something in here called, just for fun, we'll call it get genus. And this internal thing will, instead of just writing this .genus, let's just say it calls, how would I call it? Okay, I do want to have this. So I'll say this .get genus. And it'll return the genus like that. And this should continue to work. I can call description. Does not work. Why? Genus is not defined. Oh, that. So this should. What's the problem now? I'm not seeing any error anywhere. Oh, right, that. Okay, right. We're just going to write Pokemon So this works, but importantly, that helper function we made, if I try and use it, I can. And now we have some like, leaky way where we are grabbing that thing. So now genus is exposed to the world. So just like a private variable, if we want to make a function private or a method, we can do that. And I like that it sort of shows us what it is, or it did for a second, but now if I try and do this, I believe this won't work. As in I'll do that and we don't even have to run it. We see highlight, it's not accessible outside the class. So that hash is just there to keep you from, it actually buys you this encapsulation thing. And turns out that's the end. That's the only new feature of JavaScript classes that's useful. But in my opinion, even though it wasn't part of the main material we were discussing, this hash thing, that's actually a useful feature that you could theoretically use. Everything else with the prototypes is only something you will need to know when you're forced to encounter it. And that happens less and less at this point. So yeah, that's a lot, but just gonna get some feedback. How do we feel? And it's 9:52. We can give you another 10-minute break, and then when we come back, maybe we have nothing to teach you, but I'll figure out what might fit in that next hour, and or you guys have a very early lunch. So any questions about this encapsulation feature in JavaScript classes, and or all of this original JavaScript way of doing
Not a question, but there's a question in chat about double underscore for Python, and then there was a suggestion of maybe going over one of the assignments from yesterday.
Okay, we can do
JavaScript as a use of time.
Yeah, that both sound good. I'm just gonna read the comments now. Is that on your screen, by the way, when I read the comments, or no?
No.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, Daniel doesn't know what to ask. I feel you on that. I hate this topic because it's just it's not something you can learn in a very, like, when you're learning new material, there's this assumption that it was done that way for a reason. And I really don't believe this was done this way for a reason. I think this was just a product of history that they tried to solve this problem of giving you object-oriented stuff incrementally, and it didn't work out that well. Yeah, I think we can walk through assignments when we come back. Yeah, honestly, and if you see the word prototype, Google. As in, that's when you see the word prototype, now is your time to learn about prototypes. But I can't tell you how many times I've learned about it and then a day later been like, I still don't understand that. Someone's asked about double underscore in Python. Double underscore in Python is like that $sign in the sense that it's just a way of telling you, hey, we consider this an important class, or an important method. We use this name in other places, so we assume it's there, but we can't prevent you from overwriting it. So yeah, the double underscore in Python, like if I were to code, like, let's see something like this. Like if I were to, what's an example?
I believe that question was asked in relation to privatizing in JavaScript with the hash.
Right, yeah. So I don't think you can privatize things in Python, but I might be
I
wrong.
don't think so.
Like in Python, let's say I wanted to make a private variable. You're saying I could do it like genus or something?
I think the suggestion was that the $sign is the same as underscore.
It's like in the init, you can, like, if you do like self dot double underscore name, and I think makes it like a private, I'm pretty sure.
So if I were to say something like this, you're saying?
Yeah. Oh no, like just in the front of it.
Okay, let me try that. It could be, yeah, it looks like it almost knows that, yeah. So you're telling me that I can do this, and then later I could have something like, let's put a self.name in there too. Or we'll actually put that as name. And then ultimately I'm going to want to create one of these. So I'm going to say Pika equals animal Pikachu. I don't know how to spell his name. And then let's say at the end of that, I want to say print Pika dot genus. You're saying I don't have access to this?
Yeah, that's what I'm pretty. I'm trying to figure it out too.
Okay. Code. Well, I did. Oh, sorry, that's not running it. That's opening it. So yeah, that's a good point. It seemingly doesn't know about it. So if I were to write name, it would know it. Okay, that's proof enough for me. So it turns out this feature does exist. And that kind of makes sense. That I wonder when they added it, but this is a way of making a private variable in Python, where if I run this, it's going to say attribute error. That doesn't actually exist on there. I wonder, can you do it for functions too?
What does the single one do? The single underscore.
Well, does it do anything? Like, as in, if I do that, the colors are telling me it seems to know about it. So I think single underscore has no particular meaning. And the fact that double underscore has a meaning is probably something that they just added at some later date to give it a specific
Knowing about that double
feature.
underscore changes like 45 minutes of conversation we had yesterday.
What was that?
Knowing about that double underscore changes about 45 minutes of conversation that we had yesterday about this. Because the assumption was there was no private variables. And
yeah, as far as I knew, there were no private variables in Python, but there are apparently. And now I'm curious, can you have private methods? As in, if I had a method called get genus, why not? I guess take self, and then I'm guessing that get genius should be able to return this internal thing called self dot underscore underscore genus. If I wrote it like this, I could definitely do it, where I say Pika dot get genius, and that should work. But now if I say Pika dot underscore underscore get genius, will that work, or will it tell me we don't do that? Animal has no attribute get genius. Okay, so it seems like anything added to a class that starts with a double underscore and doesn't end with a double underscore is by default a private variable or method. Yeah, and I'm sorry if we contradicted that yesterday. I didn't even know this was a feature, but this is one of those things about programming languages that they can be updated. So I wonder when this feature was added, but I don't use Python that much, so I just had not encountered this feature as a new feature yet. Whereas when new features are added to JavaScript, I tend to find out more quickly, because this has probably been in Python longer than it's been in JavaScript. That JavaScript hash thing is like a few months old. I bet this is at least a year old, if not more. But yeah, that's it's good to know about. And also this is why these online bits of documentation are often useful, because you can learn about things that you didn't even know existed in there. And these things do change over time. So once you're like a professional developer, it's more common that whatever your language you work in every day is, you'll just happen upon news on a regular basis that says like, oh, they just dropped the new 10.11 update, and that comes with this and that feature. And because you're used to it, you just learn those new features as they come out, as opposed to you're kind of learning it all at once. But yeah, I apologize if we gave you bad data yesterday. Okay, so it's in Python too. That's good, because encapsulation is an important feature that objects buy you, in my opinion, and versus like plain old dictionaries or objects. So it's good that it does have it. It's 10 o'clock. Let me give you guys 10 minutes. Come back in 10 minutes. I'll see if there's anything. All right, you guys wanted to go over the assignment, so maybe I'll prepare for that. Between now and then, which is the assignment you guys generally want to go over?
The school one,
Okay,
School. JavaScript.
cool. School in JavaScript or in Python? I guess either, maybe both, but how about we'll give you guys a 15 minutes and then we'll come back and do that. Cool, see you all in 15 minutes. Everybody, I think we're about ready to come back, right? If not, I can give you another minute, but I see something in the chat about today's Beyond Tech Talk. And as far as I know, everything that's, unless you've heard differently in Slack or something, if it's on the schedule as a Beyond Tech Talk, then it's happening. The Beyond Tech Talks are usually given by a guest lecturer, so sometimes someone is or isn't available last minute. But unless someone has explicitly, like Adam has explicitly written on Slack, hey, they're not going to make it today, I'm assuming it's going to happen. And that would be at 2 p.m. CST, I believe. Yeah, let me just check. Well, I'm seeing it's 12 to 1 my time, which means it would be 1 to 2 your time, right? 1 to 2 CST. Yeah. So it's 1 p.m. CST, as far as I know. Cool. So yeah, let me share my screen right quick. We're gonna do that. And yeah, so here I have this OOP school interface file I made, or that I cloned from GitHub, and I haven't even started this yet. I read through the README, but I've actually not done this yet, so it'll be a good opportunity to sort of walk through it. Before we start, I just wanted to ask if there were particular questions about it, and also I'm assuming we want to do this in Python. But we could also theoretically do it in JavaScript, and or if we have time, do it in Python, then do it in JavaScript.
I think it might be cool to see it in JavaScript just because we're going to be working in JavaScript today. So,
okay, yep, fair enough. I know there is a different school. Let me just check that first. I know if I were to go to Tango curriculum and look at today's where is it? So I know that if we go to the end of today, we're going to see school interface 2. Interesting in Python. I would expect it to be in JavaScript. But I guess they want to add a little more to it, or no, at that point, it's just the full. They're just saying let's actually create a full, that thing. But yeah, let's try it in JavaScript. How about that? So I'm going to close this and this a little smaller. And this school interface thing, just because I don't want to destroy this one, I'm going to go up out of it a little, and then I'm going to change its name to just put Python at the end there. And then I'll in fact, I'll copy the entire thing. So we're going to copy that into a new thing called the same thing, but JS at the end. And now I should have 2 things in there. I'm going to go into the JS one. And so now any changes I make to this won't be affected by the other one. So open it up as a separate thing. And then one more thing I want to do is it's going to have some files in here, and I'm going to want to remove them. So I do ls-la. The first important one is that .git. So I do not want that .git anymore because this is not the same project. So if I wanted to use Git, I would create my own. It's the Git stuff it's mentioning now is because this is in a larger folder called demos and notes. So it has its own Git. But we're not going to worry about that right now. Instead, I'm going to look at everything that's in here. We have a README, data, runner.py, and school.py. So I definitely want to keep the data because that's the same either way. And then this README, we're going to keep it around just so I can see what we want, but we obviously want to change things in Python. And then let me just change these two files. I'll just rename them right here. I'll make it runner.js and school.js. And that's obviously not going to work here. So we're going to remove that. And instead, this would be something like const school equals new school, and we're printing school.name. And where's school coming from? Well, we're in Node, so the way we're going to import things is say something like const school equals require. And then that's going to take a path like dot slash school. And then within school.js, I can't just write class school. Instead, it's going to be something more like this. And yeah, even if we don't write anything yet, we just have class school. Well, we are saying new school there, and we're giving it a name. So I actually am going to add a constructor, which it's got to be lowercase. It doesn't actually understand that. And in the constructor, I'm going to say this dot name equals the name we pass into it. And then finally, we have to export it. So the way I do that is we have this thing called module.exports. And then I'm just going to say that is equal to school. And now I believe this all works. So let's actually try and run it with node runner.js, and it doesn't like it. It's saying print is not defined. And that would be right. Yeah, that's not actually a thing. We have to write console.log. And now let's try it. It is working. Cool. So now we have a basic thing going on here. That's so weird. I'm going to close that and reopen it, and everything should be fine again. Great. So yeah, now we have a basic thing working, and the point is just to go through the README and try and follow these steps. And obviously, you know, fill in the blanks. And we're doing it in JavaScript. So just to get your guys's feedback, or basically I want to include you guys as much as possible in this. So I'm going to be asking you questions while we do it. But right, yes. So walking through this, I see that ultimately we want this this dialogue where, we're going to be printing this stuff out and then taking input, which is notoriously annoying in JavaScript, but we can do it. But it looks like we don't do that right away. Instead, first we do some of this other stuff. So first, we do have this stuff working. And then the next step is we want to create a school class. Oh, no, we already have a school class. Is that right? Yeah. But it's telling us what that school should actually look like. Okay, so a lot of these ideas are going to be about the same. We're not going to have self. We're going to have name, or sorry, we're going to have this. But we're going to take in a name. We're going to take in, oh no, we're not taking in a staff or students. Those are just going to start out as empty lists. And honestly, I like to check stuff every time I do it. So I'm going to just print out school here so I could actually see, like, yes, that's what it looks like. Okay, cool. So what next? We want to create this student and this staff. So let's create that student.js. And I'm just going to copy paste that with this one would be staff.js. And starting with the student here, I'll copy paste it so that it's a little easier. I don't have to modify it outright, but we're creating a class called student, which doesn't inherit from anything yet. It doesn't understand what def init is. So I'm going to replace that with constructor. It's almost there. It doesn't understand these selfs. So that's now a this. And finally, it needs curly brackets as opposed to the white space and colon. And it doesn't know what self is. Okay, so now this works. I should be able to create a student like this. And again, even though we don't actually mention it here, well, first I'll create that staff too, but I like to test things out. So we're going to test things out right after this. This is a staff. The only difference between a staff is that we don't have a school ID, but an employee ID. So employee ID here, and let's actually clean this up a little because I'm seeing name, age, role. Like, let's just do this in order. So it sounds like based on how things are, they're all gonna have a name, age, role, and password. We'll do those first, and then we'll do the school ID, and then same with staff. I'm gonna switch these around just because in my opinion, the difference between like a junior and a senior developer is just that they do things in a very standardized way so that you're not like, like basically things are in the same order in all places, and it makes reading things a little easier over time. So even though it doesn't matter, I want these things in order. And now we have our student and our staff, and we currently have our runner. And first, we're not exporting anything yet. So we want to do the same thing with module.exports. So I'm going to do module.exports equals student, and similarly module.exports down here of staff, and then in my runner I should be able to grab all of those, where I'm going to say, okay, I have something called student and I have something called staff, and /. I like things to autocomplete because then I know that it actually is what I think it is. Cool, it knows about student / staff, it knows about staff. So I should be able to create one of these each as well. So I'm going to create a new student and a new staff. And I'm going to want to print all of them out just so I could see like, yep, that actually works. And then I have to give it actual things that make sense. So a student takes all these things, and I need to come up with things for that. So maybe one of you can volunteer who has a name. I mean, actually, you know what? I'm not going to ask anybody their age. That's insane. So actually, this will just be, okay, Jody, we're going to give it your name, and then we're going to guess all the other details. So Jody is a cool 27. Let's hope that doesn't make him feel old or something. Role.
Student. Wait, what is this? Hold on.
The guy. What is this? What?
No, go ahead.
Well, I'm just, and this is doing some auto formatting for me, so it's just making it a little easier to read. But I guess that's what a role is. His role is parentheses the guy. Password. He's one of those people, so it's literally password. What can you do? And then finally, he has a school ID, which is, let's just say 1. He was the first student to enroll. And then finally, staff. Staff will be me. Why not? Let's get back to runner here. I'm just going to copy paste these so I know what I'm putting in here. Benjamin, Cohen, a cool 27. Let's say that. Role. The teacher guy. Password. Real cool. Randomized one. And then employee ID, realistically, I'm probably something like 22 at Code Platoon. Then we're going to save it. And I don't love it jumping around all the time, but I do like having auto formatting on because that way I don't have to think about formatting. And that's just something I have set up with this tool called Prettier, which is an extension. It's just doing some default stuff for me to make it look a certain way. And now I lost my terminal. Okay. Cool. So now I just want to see that I can print all these out. So if I run it, indeed, I have a school, correct name, staff students, and then students. So all this looks right to me. This all looks good. So now we have our basic setup. And based on that, do we have any questions yet in terms of how we do things in JavaScript in terms of this basic, where we've gotten up to so far? All right, sounds like we don't. So we're going to continue. And this is the refactor step. So refactoring is an important idea. It tends to matter more when you have bigger projects, but refactoring, as I see it, is just you're not adding any functionality, but you're making it so that it's easy to continue growing the project, because without refactoring, often things get so spaghetti-like that it's hard to know what's affecting what. And it's just a way of refactoring is a way of like refining your solution so that you just know what everything is doing. It's as simple as it can be. And yeah, it's just a chance to like relook at things and say, can we do this in a better way without rewriting it outright? So the first thing here is it's saying about how they don't love this whole, like, they want us to use this, star keyword arguments that Python has, where instead of, giving it all those arguments, well, it's kind of annoying to give it all those arguments. And, maybe we're not giving it in the right order. So what if we passed it as, this keyword args and then use that, and we had, an object like student info like this. Well, yeah, that should be doable in JavaScript too. So let me just grab this here and make an object out of it to show you how it works. So this is how we're doing it right now. But what if we had, we can do this for staff too, but what if we had two objects? Like we had, we're going to call this student info, and I'm just copying the sort of style that we do for Python, where we're doing camel case. And if I'm going to remember, a student has these things, so I might as well name it that, where it's going to have a name and an age and a role and a password and a school ID. And this is my student info. And the idea is there a nice way to pass this to, before we even do anything for staff, is there a nice way to pass this student info to our student class? Well, if I look at our student class over here, it's expecting things in this order: name, age, role, password, school ID. So there is a way to do it, and let me just make sure I remember it. But the first thing we want to do is, so right now we're passing student info, right? And I'm going to take all of this out and just call this student info. And obviously the rest of this is not going to quite work, so let's comment it out right now. But I just want to see this stuff working, that when we create it, I want to see student info. And does this work? In fact, we're going to get rid of anything to do with staff right now. We just want the student right now. In fact, so right now we're creating a student, and then we want to print the student and see what it's like. Okay, cool. So I got this object, student info, successfully into that constructor, and we printed it. And then we see my student is empty because we haven't done anything with it yet. Okay, so here's one thing I want to do. There is a way to give that, like, so there's this thing called the spread operator. If I go like this, ... that's going to take everything in this object called student, and it's going to spread it as the arguments for this constructor. So the problem is that right now I don't really want to deal with all the arguments, but let's say I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 arguments. I could have something like this, where, now I'm just going to print these 5 things. And that should work in that, so I have a new student. Oh, because I'm passing student info. I did that wrong. Sorry. I want to do that here. So I'm going to do this. And now what does it look like? It doesn't like it. We'll find out why. Found non-callable at iterator. So as far as I know, you can spread an object. Why is this not working? I mean, I guess we don't have something exactly like we have it in Python. So instead, I think I want to do something more like this, where I just actively pass that student info. I mean, yeah, I guess what would be the, like, there is this idea of spreading something in JavaScript, but it works for, it works for arrays in this case, where there would be a way that I could pass an array of things and then get that array of arguments over here, but it would just be in order. They're not named anything. So the better way to do this in JavaScript is I just pass it this student info object. And at this end, I expect to get a student info object, which has all that stuff. And then over here, I just, I'm going to grab all these equals so I can go right over here and say student info dot that. And then I just expect that a student info has this stuff. And that is still not quite working. I wonder why. Oh, because I didn't save this. But now that is working. We're getting a student with all those things. And I mean, this isn't nearly as nice as the keyword way of doing things, but this is how you would do it in JavaScript because it doesn't have this concept of keyword arguments. You can't exactly do that. But yeah, and you might be saying like, well, this isn't so great because student info doesn't know anything. It doesn't know it has a name. This is where something like TypeScript would come in, where if I had TypeScript, I could actually say, okay, well, student info has a certain shape. It's going to have a name, age, role, password, school ID. And so at this end, I would know it had all that. And if it didn't, that would be, it would actually blow up before running anything. But this is the best way to do this, given how Python works. And we'll do the same thing again for staff, because that's something that we want. So I'm just going to copy this because we're going to have something pretty similar, where we're going to have something called staff info. I'm just going to copy these values over. I do generally like to see things working. So even though this might seem like a slight waste of time, I think it's worthwhile. And that's no longer a school ID when we're dealing with staff, rather it's called an employee ID. Cool. And then finally, I'm going to uncomment this and uncomment these. And then staff is now no longer taking that, but rather it's going to take its staff info object. And then same thing I did with this here. I'm going to have something called staff info that gets passed to staff. And then for each one of these equals, we're going to have staff info dot. And now I would imagine that this works. And it does. We have our staff, we have our student, and we have our school, and they all make sense. So how do we feel about this so far? Like, we're kind of adapting on the fly to doing things in the JavaScript way, not the Python way, but we can more or less get pretty similar functionality, but there are some times where things are different. You can't get this keyword args thing. There is something in Python called args. But you'll see that if I try to print args, and I wouldn't want to print it like this, I'd want to spread it, I believe. If I were to run this, we would see that when it comes to, doesn't even like that, args is not iterable. Really, I thought it would be, but I'm just going to print args like that. Is that my undefined? There's definitely is it called arguments or something? There is a keyword in JavaScript called args, but I guess it's not worth getting into. You don't see it that often because it's only really useful when you, like, for like console.log, for example. Console.log can take like an infinite number of arguments. So that's how you work with an infinite number of arguments with the args keyword. But it's not worth getting into the details of that now. Okay, we're going to keep going. We want to move our classes into a class folder. Okay, I'm fine with that. We're We're going to call it classes, and then we're going to grab student, staff, person, and school. Student, staff. Oh, we haven't even created person yet, but we're going to. We're going to move those into classes. It says, are you sure you want to move them? Move. Okay, sometimes it asks if you want to update your references, but it didn't ask that this time. And we're also going to create a person.js. We're going to fix all this, but before we do that, we're just going to say, okay, well, they all, what's the word? They all export themselves. What if I wanted to import them? Well, I could say, I would have to say this for all of them. I don't know why I just updated this one. They're all in classes now. So if I were to run this, this would not work right now. It would complain about not knowing about some module, right? So I can update it like this. So this should work now. This is actually an opportunity to show you something cool that is JavaScript only. JavaScript often uses this word index as a special word for files. So in this classes thing, I could say new file index.js. And then the way this works is that if I'm in runner here, I don't have to say dot class is this, dot class is that. I can just say dot classes, and that's actually going to get whatever this index file exports. So I can say something like, I can just call this something like classes, and we'll see how this works. Hold on. So we're just going to call that classes, and we see that person, school. Well, we don't have person yet, but let's just create it quickly just so we have something. We'll get more specific about what a person consists of. But yeah, we're seeing that my person exports person, school exports school, staff exports staff, etc. And then in this index, I could basically say, this is just sort of a helper thing where I'm gonna import all of them. I'm gonna say const school. What are all of them? Let's just do them in order. Why not? I'm gonna say const person equals require / person. We're going to copy that a couple times because we want to do it for school / school and staff and / staff and student and / student. You might say, why am I requiring all of them here? Well, now I can from here say module.exports. And what does it export? It actually exports an object, and that object is just going to contain all these things. So instead of saying something like, person is person, I can just write person. So I'm going to say person, school, staff, student, and save that. And now from here, I can say, okay, I got this thing called classes, and now I want to I can say classes like this, and then const something equals classes. And then I can actually start to unpack it here where I say, okay, well, what do we have in here? We have a person, we have a school, we have a staff, and we have a student. And now everything should work like before. And you tend to see this pattern a lot where you export something as like a whole. You're just exporting all your classes, and then you pull off the ones you want with destructuring. And as you see, we don't actually use person yet. So I'm going to say, let's get rid of person as something we export. So in index.js, we do not export person. We're kind of saying like, hey, that's not something we want just about any, we don't want just, we don't want the general user to use it. Instead, it's going to be something that's only for the school and the staff. So that's something we haven't done yet that we want to do, which is make them extend. So, right. So first we want to see like, okay, we have a person here, and a person is basically whatever a student and a staff shares, which are these four things. So it would look like that. And maybe we'll just call this something like info object. So it's not unique to a student or anything. We're just I'm gonna call it config object. I like that a little better. Config object. So a person's going to expect this config object with name, age, role, and password. And then we never actually make persons directly. Instead, we make staff and students. So here we have a staff, and we're going to say that actually extends person. And we don't know about persons, so we got to make sure we add that, which is const person equals require person. And how is this going to work? Well, it's going to get in this staff info object, and that staff info object is going to have an employee ID on it. But besides for that, we're going to be able to say super, which is our person, and we want to pass that the staff info object. And that staff info object is going to have everything on it needs as well. And then we're going to do the same exact thing for person. Let's just put those side by side so we can see it. Staff and student rather. So my student also requires this person ID idea. And then we're going to call super on the student info, and then only that one bit is going to be different. And I like this because this should work now. But something I like is that because we're using this index thing, we're not actually passing person anywhere. It's only staff and student that know about person. Runner's not even going to know about person. So I would expect this to work now, but it's important that we actually see it work. So let's try that. And it's not working. Let's find out why. Cannot find module person. And where is it complaining? In staff, it can't find module person. That's right, because I said require person when I actually want to say /person. And similarly in student, I want to say /person. Let me just check index to make sure I did it right there. I did. Okay. So let's try running it. Still not working. Super keyword unexpected here. Where is it unexpected? Oh, right, because we didn't actually add our extends person, but once we do, it should understand it. Try it again. Everything's working. Okay, so we're in a pretty good place with our refactoring. We're using inheritance, and we're using some other sort of fun things like this, config type object, which is a replacement for our keyword arg. So how do we feel about this so far? Are we ready to now work with the CSV stuff? All right, I'm going to take that as a yes. So here's an interesting point. Now we're at a point where, okay, CSV. Well, how do we do CSV in JavaScript? We don't have this Python CSV library. So this is probably the most common thing you're going to do as a developer, where you say like, okay, well, what about, JavaScript CSV? And I see that, okay, there's something called CSV for Node.js on the web, and it's explained to me how it works a little bit. And so this is kind of the hardest part, where it becomes like, well, how do I use a new library? I don't even know about this library. So someone's, we got this question here where I wonder if someone's going to say, how could I do it? Just, yeah, there's an option there. We could do it without even messing with a library, but we might as well show some kind of library. You'll always see someone advertising, ooh, pop-up a parse. That's the good one. And I see that it's in browser, but chances are it probably works for Node too. Okay, and then what would be my, oh, I guess I don't want a demo. I want like the docs. I just want to see a basic example. So now the question is this on, like if I go to their GitHub, can I get it for Node as well? Yeah, okay, so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to say npm install pop-up parse, and we actually haven't used npm much, but npm is going to be like how we npm is not only how we download things, but it's also sort of integrated into the running of things in JavaScript. So the first thing I'm going to do is write npm init. It's gonna normally that would ask me some questions, but I'm gonna say -y to just answer all the questions. And now I have this package.json. I'll look at it. I'm fine with that name, version. Let's just remove the description. Unless you're sharing it, main doesn't actually matter, but let's just leave it there, runner.js. We're saying this is the main file. We have scripts here. We have keywords, I don't care. Author, I might as well add my name. And then license is basically if you're sharing it, this would be you giving permission or not permission to people to copy your code. So MIT is the most general license that says you can do whatever you want with this code, including make money off of it. And then this is an important point where I'm going to say for script here, I'm going to have something called start. And then in that start, I'm just going to say node runner.js. So now in the future, people don't even have to know that runner.js is the main thing. They can just write npm start, and that's going to run our code. And I like that. And now I'm going to do this npm install for pop-up parse. Let me just remember what that looked like. It's called pop-up parse. So I'm going to write npm install pop-up parse. But importantly here, we want this to actually update our package.json. So I'm going to do --save. And this is going to install it and then also include it as a dependency. And then you'll notice we also have node modules here now, which has pop-up parse in it. So cool. Now let me try messing with pop-up parse. Let's just see that it works. Let's do it at this top level here. I'm just going to say, I like to import non-local things first. So I'm going to say const. Let me just remember what that looks like, the pop-up parse stuff. We'll put it right next to us. Okay, so can we get some examples, pop-up parse? Let's see, documentation. Okay, so at first we have this thing called papa. That's where we want to start. We're going to say something like const papa equals require. And what are we requiring? Well, it's not relative. We just say they're not actually telling us. So I believe it should just be the name of whatever it is in package.json. So require pop-up parse. And let's see that we actually did something. So we're going to say console.log papa just to see that we are getting anything. Let's run it. Okay, cool. There's this whole big thing that represents pop-up parse. And let's try and use it. I can pass it a file and that should do something. So I'm going to say something like, just to test it out here, we care about our student.csv. So I'm going to say something like const students equals papa.parse. And the first thing it could take is a file. So I'm assuming it could take not just a file, but like an actual relative path. So we're going to say data.students.csv. And I doubt that this works well out of the box. It's probably going to want some kind of config, but let's just see what students equals now. There's a lot in there. It says data, errors, delimiter, undetectable, delimiter. So this is kind of the hardest part of like, you got to learn a new library suddenly. So I got to figure out like, okay, well, pop-up parse can take a file, but it actually needs to know it's a file seemingly. And where does file come from? Oh, I see file is some kind of is something that, yeah, so I wish pop-up parse would show it to me in a slightly easier way. It might want me to like read things first. So yeah, this is probably the part I'm going to get caught up on, which is making pop-up parse work for me. For all I know, pop-up parse was a bad choice. Maybe I could have just done it from scratch. I probably could have done it from scratch. Okay. In fact, I am going to do that. We have 5 minutes, so might as well see us doing that because oftentimes that can be easier than using some library. So I'm going to remove my dependencies list right now. We're not even using papa.parse anymore. We're we're going to take out pop it out parse here. We are going to include const fs equals require fs. So fs is the built-in file system thing in Python, or sorry, in JavaScript. I might have to look it up where I say Node.js. Sorry, not Node.js. I wanted to say Node.fs. So it's probably going to get a little advanced fast, but and as you see, I kind of hate how they do their documentation here. It's very confusing, but I want to read a file. See how this works. Okay, I kind of like that. I'm going to say, we can't write it exactly like this, but I can say from fs, I guess, / promises, I want to grab something called read file. So I'm just going to say fs, I'm just going to call that fs. And then I should have something in here now called fs.promises. Just, we're going to ignore that for now. I'm going to say console.log fs. Okay, it already knows about things. I'm going to say read file. And what does read file actually do? We're going to take a path. And then what else? In options and coding. So I think I can write something like fs.readfile, our relative path, which is going to be data / students.csv. And it's going to want this options object, which includes something called encoding. And I'm going to say, well, this is just, I wonder if it autocompletes anything for me. No, it doesn't know. This is just saying, like, I just want normal, like, it's not going to understand Unicode or emojis, just going to be the normal way. And I'll save that as a big string that represents my students. So const student string, student CSV string. And I'll print that out first, and I see we're running out of time. And it's a promise. That's important to know that that's why I want to do something like I should be able to have a yeah, it gets even more complicated. So I'm going to say creating a function here. It's getting kind of advanced. Async function get CSV, get string from CSV. And maybe that's going to take in a file name. File path, rather. And I'm going to call that function with this as my input. And over here, I'll just pass that file path down. And we're going to read that file, but that's going to return a promise. So we're going to await that promise. And whatever it returns, we're going to save as CSV as string. And now I'm going to return CSV as string. And now let's try and print student CSV string. Oh, and over here, I want to write await as well. Now let's try that. It's probably not going to like it because await is, yeah. This is getting annoying for sure. We're getting into sort of JavaScript specific stuff where either I have to wrap all this in an async function, or I have this dot then, and then everything else has to be in the dot then. We're gonna wrap everything in an async function, but it's going to look weird. As in, basically, starting from the very top here, this whole thing is going to be a function that we call, or I guess just this part, but basically I'm going to have this big function called get string from CSV, and I'm just going to put kind of all of my logic in there now. And then I importantly have to call it So after I define it, I actually call it, but within this get string from CSV thing, or we'll call it get students from CSV. Within here, we're going to say await this thing, save it as the CSV string, and then console.log it. But this is probably the problem with doing this in JavaScript, that JavaScript by default is not going to do things in a synchronous way, which will be different than file path is not defined. That's right. I just deleted that. I'll let you guys go to lunch in 1 second. I'm just grabbing this and putting it back just to see if this works. So yeah, we didn't get as far as we hoped we would, but let's just see if we got at least this. Great. We're at least getting that as a string now. And now we can work with it and do stuff. But we're already over time. And we probably bit off more than we can chew with doing stuff in a JavaScript way because we didn't account for this. I believe I actually even have read file sync, and that would solve this problem of things being weird. But yeah, we're going to break for now, and we're going to come back for, let's just check to make sure the calendar. We're going to come back for the Beyond Tech Talk, which is going to be at 1 p.m. CST for you guys. And then after that, I'm guessing we're going to start working on the assignments for today. And those are in general in JavaScript. I think there's a second, like a finishing the OOP school interface assignment that is the same as yesterday's in Python, and they just want you to finish building it. But yeah, this is what we get for trying to do something in JavaScript when we didn't necessarily plan for it. But yeah, cool. Hopefully you learned something from that. And I want to wrap up quickly because I am eating into your lunch 2 minutes now. So thanks a lot, guys. If you have any questions, you can stay on, but everyone else can leave if you're good. And if you don't have questions, just say nothing.
I had a question. Could you go over the part with the what was it? The JSON package?
Sure. I'm
did.
going to share my screen again. So again, anyone can leave at this point, but we will be recording this. So the part with the JSON package, which part? Like the fact that
you had npm init -y. What was that doing?
I'll show you in a second. My Zoom is about to crash. I'll be right back.
Okay.
1, 2, 3. Any second now, it's going to crash. Any second now, because it shows me all these. Hey, I'm back. It likes to do that. So yeah, what was I doing with the npm init? So basically, you see this. There's a couple files that were created. So we originally had classes data. Here's this node modules thing. I'm going to delete it. We're going to outright delete node modules. And then we're also going to delete package.j or package lock. We're going to delete package.json. And now we're back to where we were, where we just have runner.js, and I can still write node runner.js and it will work. NPM, so the way that packages are installed in Python versus JavaScript is a little different. In Python, they're kind of shared throughout the system, whereas in JavaScript, they're per project. So, and that's why there's no concept of a virtual environment with JavaScript. So instead, here I am, this is all I have, and I'm going to write npm init. When you run that within a project, that creates a bunch of files and initializes this as sort of an npm aware project. So notice I'm not doing -y this time. -y stands for like -yes. It just means answer yes to every question they give you and just give defaults. But instead I'll do it the normal way. It's going to ask me some questions. So it says, okay, so what is your package name? I like that default version. Cool. Description. Great project. Entry point. This doesn't really matter. It only matters if you're sharing this project with other people. But entry point is just so people know, oh, if I want to start learning about this project, look at that file first. So we'll say runner. Test command. We don't have any tests, so no. Git repository. If we had a remote Git repository, we could put it in here, but we could always add that later. keywords, just if it's like people are searching for it on NPM, we could say school, author, Benjamin Cohen, license, let's make it MIT. Is this okay? Yes, cool. So all that created at first is this package.json, which has it's just a JSON object. It has a bunch of information in it. I want to take out this test thing, so I will, but I'm going to replace it with something called start. And start will just, I will be able to run that by saying npm start. And in there, I'll just say node, which I expect to be on the system, and then runner.js. So now I can write, instead of writing node runner.js, I can write npm start, and it does the same thing. It's complaining because it doesn't know about read file sync or something, but I'm not really going to worry about that right now. Why is it complaining about that? Oh, because I added the word sync, right? It doesn't know about that. Let's run this again. So it works. So this isn't necessary, but it's nice because as a project grows, people won't want to know exactly the command to start the project. You could have other ones like something called dev, which is, unique from start, and it's just for the developers or something. And maybe as this grows, there's all these arguments in here that they won't know about. But we're not quite done. So the question is, what if we wanted to use that pop-up parse library? Well, we would want to install it. So the way you do that is npm install pop-up parse. But the problem with this will work, and also as a shorthand, you can just write I, but it's nice to write it all out. But if we just write this, what we're going to do is download this file in node modules, but we aren't making our package.json aware of it. And the problem with that is that we want a situation where if we share this, we can share the file, share the package.json. We don't share this node modules folder. Instead, they just write npm install, and it looks there and downloads all that. So we're going to write -- save. And as you see, we have this dependencies list now with papa.parse. This means, I forget exactly what that caret means, but basically it's telling anyone else who downloads a copy of this project that they're going to want the latest, I think that arrow means latest version, no worse than 5.3.2. So if 5.3.4 comes out, it'll download that instead. And then you'll notice we have this package lock.json, very hard to read, but this is there just for integrity. If different environments have slightly different situations, you generally don't have to worry about it. And then the important point is this node modules folder. Node modules is the folder that's going to contain any package you downloaded from the internet. So all of papa.parse is here, or papa parse is here. And then within runner, if I wanted to reference it, I would say something like const papa equals require. And then I don't actually say / because it's not my own thing. Much like if it was built into Node, I just say papa parse, and basically it's going to look for it in node modules and it's going to find it. And that's everything you would need to know at this point about npm and package.json. And we're going to come back to that a lot more when we actually do JavaScript development. So yeah, that's it. If you have more questions, you can stay on and ask, but I really don't expect people to be staying at this point. You don't want to eat in too much to your lunch. You want to actually use it and relax a little. So feel free to leave and or stay if you have more questions, and we can go for another like 5 minutes or something.
Yeah, I had a question real quick, just about when I did my project. I installed Inflect, right? So there's already a JSON file for auto grading. Would I just like add it in there? Would I just do like install inflect -- save, and it would automatically put it into the auto grading file, or would I have to make like a separate one?
I'm not sure what you're talking about exactly. Can you repeat what's the context?
Okay, I can share my screen real quick.
Sure. Yeah, I'll stop sharing.
Okay. So this is my project, and I used for Python, I installed Inflect, and that gave me like the plural for my project. So there's already an auto grading JSON. in here. So would I have to make like a brand new JSON file just for my inflect here in order to, so I can upload on, because I had troubles with the auto grading on GitHub because I didn't have a JSON file for it.
Yeah.
So would I be able to just -- save after I did the install inflect here and it would already do the auto grading, or would I have to make a separate one?
I think the question doesn't quite make sense because that .github folder is there. Really, it shouldn't be shared with you guys, but it's there. That dot is meant to say this is a hidden folder. This has to do with like the grading and stuff. But
Okay.
we're in Python, and Python doesn't necessarily share that idea of --save, and it does its packages in a totally different way. So there is no package.json or package_JSON here, whatever, package.json. That file doesn't exist here because this isn't a JavaScript project.
Right. Okay.
So I'm not sure that if I'm misunderstanding your question, you could tell me. But basically, there's no way to add any --save to that pip3 that is going to change its behavior because that's not, pip3 is not NPM.
Okay. Well, I just didn't know, essentially, I guess I just didn't know how to install this so that when I share it, it automatically installs for everyone else, essentially.
Yeah, so there's a different way to do that in Python. Instead of using that package.json, Python has this idea called, it's kind of similar. Basically, you have a file called requirements.txt, and that file would contain something like, you know, the word inflect, and then after it, like a version number. And then anyone who downloaded your project would know that if you had a requirements.txt, they would type like Python. I don't remember I think it's like pip3 -r and then requirements.txt. So there's certainly a way to do a similar thing with pip, but it's not identical. And we will get to it later in the course.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Cool. All right. Anything else? I'm amazed everyone's still on here, or I guess most people probably did go to lunch already. They're just on mute. Yeah. But if we're good, we're just going to stop recording and everyone's going to go to lunch. Cool.